Hi there. My name is Lucas Weiss, and I am the host of the Weesesports Quarantine Chronicles. For today's episode, I'm joined by Josh Clipperton, the national hockey writer for the Canadian Press. In this episode, I chat with Josh about the challenges of producing content amidst the pandemic, what life is going to be like as a reporter when the NHL returns, his journey as a hockey writer, and his advice for young journalists breaking into the industry. The Weesports Quarantine Chronicles is available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. So make sure to like, rate, watch, and subscribe to all three of those channels. Now let's get to episode 52 with Josh Clipperton on the Weesports Quarantine Chronicles. All right, on today's episode of the Weesports Quarantine Chronicles, I'm joined by Josh Clipperton. He is a national hockey writer at the Canadian Press. Josh, welcome to the Weesports Quarantine Chronicles.
Thanks for having me, Lucas.
Josh, I mean, it feels like, an eternity ago since we've had hockey. It must feel weird for you. I mean, what were those days like, in March where, the league shuts down and now we've just been in like hiatus waiting for the sport to return?
Yeah, no, it was strange days. I was at the rink on, I guess it would have been March 12th when they had, actually I was there on March 11th. It was there was a morning skate and the Leafs played that night against the Tampa Bay Lightning, I think. And then we went there the next day, and that's when everything started to happen. And then you go there the next day, and you see, bags getting packed up, and like no one knows anything. But yeah, it was crazy. And then from there, it's just been a lot of, you have to be a little bit creative with your story ideas. But there's enough going on, and teams are willing to make guys available, and you just have to sort of think outside the box and use your journalism brain, your story brainstorming brain, and go from there.
Yeah, and like I think there's been a lot of Zoom calls. I'm assuming for the media now, and I'm just sort of curious. Like you mentioned about using your creative journalistic brain, but it still must be a little bit challenging though, given that this is just such a shift, dramatic shift from what covering a team used to be.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. No, it's completely different, and it really gives you an appreciation of the getting to talk to people one-on-one. Getting able to ask a question on the side, being able to ask a follow-up question. A lot of the best stories don't come from scrums; they come from little conversations you have off to the side. Any of the great stories they don't usually come from a scrum, and that's what we basically do in online scrums for the past 3 months. So, yeah, it gives you an appreciation for the access, and we all know why it's the way it is, and everyone accepts that. But we also hope that there's no clawback of that whenever things go back to normal, whether it's next year or whenever, because the access really is important. And I think it's not about us, the reporters; it's about the fans. It's about getting those stories out. And if it's only over a Zoom call, you're never going to get nearly as much information as you could in other situations.
Josh, of course, this is such a fluid situation, about hub cities. I mean, when this episode gets published, we may already know the hub cities by then. But I'm just sort of curious for you, covering, the potential return to hockey. Look, I mean, sports is, our livelihood. It's, for many, media and, players, personnel, staff, it's, it's their job. It's what they get to put food on the table. But at the same time, in the backdrop, there's this pandemic going on that's, affecting families, players, etc. So as a reporter, like, how do you balance those two realities?
Well, yeah, it is a balance. You obviously know that there's much more important things in life than what you're actually doing. That's true for a lot of people, in terms of a lot of walks of life, I'd say. You hope that sports comes back. It's starting to come back, as we know, in certain places. The whole hub city thing is interesting. We don't know what will happen, what it'll look like. So yeah, there's tons of unknowns as we record this. But it's definitely a very uncertain time for everyone, across the world, and sports reporters are no different. You get paid to go to games, and you get paid to watch and make your assessment, and we can't do that right now. So you can only, as we said earlier, you can only watch so many Zoom calls or be part of so many Zoom calls. So yeah, it's tough because no one likes being stuck at home, and that's just the reality of it. But you just hope that as many people as possible are safe, and we come out on the other side, and we'll get back to some level of normal hopefully soon.
And, this is still, TBD, but, in terms of, the return to play, like for you, I know, you spend a lot of time covering the Leafs. Like, are you just going to watch the games at home and write stories from the Zoom conference calls?
We don't know yet. It's going to be really up to the NHL. It depends what the hubs are. I don't think that you'll see any Canadian reporters traveling to the U.S. if they're both in the U.S. If they're both or one of them is in Canada, I think you'll see, depending on the access that we're offered. Obviously, the players will be in a bubble, but I think being in the rinks will be important just for like the scene of empty stadiums and whether it's crowd noise or whatever, what have you. I think it's not just about there's so much you see from a game that's not on TV. I mean, replays are important. Excuse me. It just depends what the league will allow. I think the NHL, and this is just my opinion, I think they know that they can't probably shut the media out entirely. Like there'll definitely be some type of availability, but are we going to be doing Zoom calls like after every game? Like I would hope personally that if there's reporters in the building, that there might be at least one or two players available from a press conference from a distance, whether it's 20 feet back or whatever. But yeah, these are all unknowns. But I mean, even getting in the building would be big, because there's just so much stuff that you pick up on away from the play, away from the puck. The coaches on the benches, everything it's just gonna be such a spectacle. It's important to be there to tell the readers and the viewers what it's all about.
And, covering the Leafs this year, I mean, roller coaster might be considered an understatement, because, this has been the same season that, like Babcock gets fired and
feels like 10 years ago.
Yeah. And they lose to David Ayres, an emergency goalie. Like, so, I mean, and now, of course, with the pandemic and everything, what would you like once the season is done, if it finishes, whether it's the Leafs, whatever happens, like what would you characterize, this season for the Leafs?
Well, wow, for the Leafs in particular, even without the pandemic, it was crazy. I mean, with everything you just mentioned, I go back to it. Even, I mean, you can go back to the Marner contract in September. You can go to healthy scratching Jason Spezza on opening night, which was basically Mike Babcock giving the finger to management over that signing. And then obviously that was like sort of when the clock really started to tick down on Babcock. I mean, you look at Kapanen showing up late to practice, the Matthews stuff that happened over the summer that came out in training camp or started training camp. So, I mean, lucky for them, the script isn't finished yet. Hopefully they'll be able to finish the season. But yeah, no, I mean, I've only covered the team for, it'll be my third year. It's by far the craziest. And I'm sure you ask guys that cover the team a lot longer than that it's been one of the more crazy years. I mean, there was literally, I remember one day we were just like, there's nothing stopping. Like it just keeps coming every day. Every day there was something, and it wasn't, and it wasn't all bad news, but a lot of it was bad news, and some of it was good news. But it was just it was crazy roller coaster. He said, like you said, definitely an understatement.
Yeah, I mean, I had Lance Hornby on the show, a few weeks back, and like he's covered the team for many years. So I mean, and he even said it was one of the craziest seasons. So it definitely keeps a young reporter like you on your toes, Josh.
Yeah. Well, that definitely. I think that might have even been Lance who I was talking about when we were saying how crazy the season was, and that was obviously before the pandemic. I think it might have even been before Ayres, or maybe it was when Ayres happened. But yeah, it was a crazy season. We're only 70 games into it.
I want to shift gears and talk about your journalism career. You're a proud graduate of Carleton University's journalism program, like many of the top sports media members here in this country. I'm just curious. I mean, was sports journalism always the path for you, Josh?
No, not at all. Actually, I grew up in Ottawa. My dad worked at CBC Radio in Ottawa, so I always was into like local radio. He was there for 35 years. Did a little bit of national stuff, but mostly local. And I mean, from the earliest age, I knew I wanted to be in journalism. I just didn't know what. I did internships at CBC, like in high school and then in university. And then I did an internship after university at CBC in London, England. So I was always thinking radio, TV, news, and came back after the internship with, no money and, not sure what I was going to do. And CP had an opening in their internship program, and I worked news for the first summer, worked online desk back when those things existed, when you had to like actually code everything and put it on the internet. And then just hung on, did whatever I could to hang on. And then sports sort of happened. Always been a massive sports fan, but I actually kind of liked separating the two for at least early, because it was fun to not still be a fan, I guess, which you can't really be when you're a sports supporter. So to answer your question in a roundabout way, no, it was never always sports. It kind of happened, but definitely thankful for how it's played out.
And, you at CP, you're surrounded by a lot of like amazing colleagues. Like was Chris Johnson there when you were there?
Yeah.
Like,
He and I overlapped he was there for 4 years when I was there. So, so when I started sports, like he was still a national hockey writer, and he'd obviously followed Caleb Brunn, but I was a desk editor. So I was working like the Wednesday to Sunday or like Tuesday to Saturday, like 8 p.m. to 3 a.m. So when all your friends are out, having fun on a weekend, or they're at a cottage, you're stuck editing, MLS copy from the West Coast or whatever at 1:30 in the morning on a Saturday. So, it wasn't all glory, and I wouldn't say it's all glory now, but it never really felt like work. It's always been fun, and but yeah, it's definitely not a straight line, definitely not a straight path, and it's I'm very fortunate for where I got to, but it's not like I became the national hockey writer overnight. I went out to Vancouver for 4.5 years after starting in Toronto. So yeah, it's a long and winding road.
What was that experience like, going to Vancouver? Because I know that a lot of young journalists, they have that aspiration of working in Toronto, but you may have to go to another city to be able to get your feet wet and to get those reps in order to then have the opportunity to come back and work in the big smoke.
Yeah, Vancouver is definitely a big market. There's other than there's still 3 teams there. It just so happened that job became opened up at CP. Someone had taken a buyout, and the job was open, and I'd been working the night shift in Toronto for 3-4 years at that point, maybe even longer. And I got sprinkled in a bit of reporting here and there. Excuse me, got to the odd TFC game or the odd Jays game, but for the most part, it was 4 or 5 days a week at night. And but that's become a good writer is by editing. And Vancouver was a great job, and the only reason I left is because this job came open. We were very happy out there. It's fun city, good, great place to live. Expensive, but great place to live. And but if you look at I would encourage any young journalist or whoever to just look at reporters' bios. Very few people start out, as a 25-year-old hotshot. A lot of people have gone to much smaller places than Vancouver to get things started. Like my very first job was working at a weekly newspaper. This is before I did the CBC internship in London, England. But so I worked 8 months at a weekly newspaper north of Ottawa in a little place called Wakefield, Quebec. So that was where I got my start. Your first bylines, and you just sort of build from there. And it's not easy. I'm not going to say it's easy, and you have to be helped and get a lot of luck along the way sometimes. But
sure.
But Vancouver was a big step, and but yeah, coming back to Toronto was important eventually, just for family reasons. But it's you go where the jobs are.
And was it in Vancouver, Josh, where like you're starting to develop those relationships in hockey, like that enable you to be a successful national hockey writer? Because not only are you covering the whole league, but those relationships help when you're writing and creating stories.
Yeah, for sure. It's always important to to get your face out there, to introduce yourself, shake as many hands. If you have a day off, look up and see if there's an agent that lives in Vancouver and say, hey man, I'm a hockey writer, or I'm a journalist, and I'm not, this is all off the record. Can I buy you coffee and just sort of chat and see what you're about? And then, they'll get to know you, and, at least at the very least, you'll have their email address or their phone number. And then from there, you never know, right? Like, 99 times out of 100, maybe it doesn't go anywhere, but you never know who that one person was. And then, things start to build from there. And then, so just to answer your question, you start to just develop, even just developing relationships with players, they might not know your name right away, but they'll start to recognize you. You get to know the PR people, firing emails off just to say for the visiting team coming in, like, hey, can I just, come and say hello? And then from there, I PR guys that you see once a year still remember you, and they might help you out. I mean, they're not going to bend over backwards, but if there's a guy that maybe you missed, then maybe they'll help you out, bring them out for a quick, second interview or 2 minutes on the side or whatever. So, yeah, I mean, it's all about getting your face out there, conversations. It's not easy. Like I can be shy. I definitely was shy. It's not an easy thing to do, but you can't. I mean, if you're a journalist, you got to be prepared to get a lot of no's in your life. So, I mean, you can't be scared, and you just got to work at getting, like I said, developing those sources, and it's just a lot of legwork.
Well, Josh, I mean, seeing you in scrums and, working and out, you definitely ask a lot of questions. I don't know what you're talking about being shy, but
it wasn't always like that, man. It wasn't always like that. Trust me.
So, I mean, one of the things about, people with, with the Canadian press is like, you see Canadian press articles in like TSN, Sportsnet, CTV, these other outlets. Maybe can you just like explain to the listeners who may not, know what really the Canadian press is and does and how it operates?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so we're the classic wire service in the sense that we, produce stories in our clients, whether it's, TSN, like you mentioned, CBC, Sportsnet, real newspapers like the Star, the Globe, and then smaller papers across the country. They subscribe to our service. Obviously, bigger publications pay more, and smaller ones pay less. And some only subscribe to sports, and some only subscribe to arts or news or business or what have you. And then from there, we send it out on our wire, and then they can pick and choose what they want to do. Like I once explained it to like a younger relative who just didn't really understand. I'm like, well, picture it as like a grocery store. So you pay to go in the grocery store, and you can pick whatever you want, or you can pick nothing. And that's kind of how the wire looks. So like the publications will just pick and choose what they want. We prefer if they don't make too many changes to the copy, but that's kind of it's sort of theirs. They can do what they want with it at some point within reason. Sometimes names get put on it, sometimes they don't. You ask a wire reporter, there's not a lot of glory in being in the wire a lot of times. I mean, a lot of times just for space reasons, names get taken off. So yeah, that's basically it. We sort of fill in the blanks or fill in the gaps where other places wouldn't be able to be. So for example, like I'll cover a Leafs Canucks, or that's not a bad example. I'll cover like a Leafs Jets game, for example, and so TSN doesn't have anybody covering them for the Jets, right? Like in Toronto, so like that story will go up on the website, right? Same thing in Vancouver. Like if the Senators are playing the Canucks, TSN's not going to have anybody there to actually write. They'll have people there reporting, but I'll write the story, and then it goes up. So it feeds both fan bases. It sort of covers the bases and fills in the gaps and gets all the details. So every fan at least knows what happened.
And how is your, because I've had, people on the show and, they've just talked about how, their job as a reporter has just changed so much over their time in the industry. And like you mentioned how, the whole desk concept isn't as big now as it once was, but maybe just describe like how, your job just has changed since when you first started at CP until now.
Yeah, I mean, like for me, I actually came in right at sort of the start of video, and the CP's always had to, like reporters have always had to cut audio clips. So like, well, if there's like after a game, you'll also cut a couple audio clips. It's pretty simple. It just takes a little bit of time. You just cut like a 15-second clip, and then you write a little audio skit, and then you send it off, and our audio people back in Toronto will move it. Video was obviously the big thing, I think, for older reporters having to shoot video. It's a challenge for sure. It's not easy. You're filing for 3 different platforms, and I think sometimes any reporter will tell you that nothing's ever perfect because you're doing 3 different things at the same time, right? I think a lot of writers would just like to write. A lot of video people probably just like to shoot video, and a lot of people that might be audio people would just want to deal with audio. But that's not the reality. You have to be very malleable and able to move quickly on the fly. So that's the video aspect I think would be the most, but the thing is like I sort of came in right when that was starting. Like jobs change constantly. I mean, Twitter changes everything. It used to be that stuff was, you could get it out a little later, but now it's, everyone's like, what's your deadline? I'm like, absolutely right now. Like whenever you're ready to talk. So, yeah, I think just the immediacy in general has changed. I mean, when I started in journalism school, there was nothing about online news. So that's how quickly it changed, right? Like I started at Carleton in 2001, and I took a couple of years off, and then I went back to finish. So by the time I graduated in 2007, like things had changed drastically. So yeah, that sort of mid 2000 range is when things really got different in the industry, I think.
So you know, at the Canadian Press, you've had a lot of opportunity to cover a lot of big events, you know, during your time. You know, is there a moment or a story or an event that really stands out to you as like, this was so like important for my career, just you know, having the opportunity to cover such a big event?
Yeah, I mean, I've been to a couple Olympics, which are obviously cool, but like to get to that point, you had to cover other things. I think that when I first thought that, yeah, this is like I'm kind of moving up, is when I got to cover the Commonwealth Games in Scotland back in 2014. So that it's a smaller event, but I mean that's kind of where you sort of get to, you know, cut your teeth a little bit. So that was really cool. And then obviously, like, you know, getting to go to I went to the Paralympics in Sochi, which was another sort of, you know, test, you know, making sure you can handle it. And then from there, I got to go to Rio, and then from Rio did South Korea. Sorry, lost track of the Olympics. And I was gonna go to Tokyo this summer. Obviously, that's not happening. So yeah, even as I was very thankful, even though I got promoted to the hockey writer job, that they're still gonna let me go to the Summer Olympics. Obviously, that's not happening now, so we'll have to see what happens next year. But yeah, just in terms of those moments, I don't look at those moments as like, wow, this is like good for me. It's just like, it's really cool to just be there, like in the moment. It's just really neat. You're just so fortunate to get that chance. And even like in journalism, you know, a lot of people have really good jobs and they never do go to the Olympics. I mean, so I've just been really lucky to get to cover some of these events, cover some of these, you know, big moments. You know, I could list off a bunch of races and, you know, but gold medals and that kind of thing. It's just really cool. It's a great opportunity and a great responsibility to tell those stories.
And yeah, like I think, you know, you hit the nail on the head there at the end. It's all about the stories, and like these events wouldn't be the grand events that they are if they weren't, you know, filled with really compelling stories. And like, you know, as a national hockey writer, you know, the year, you know, there's so many events, from the Stanley Cup Final, NHL playoffs, to the draft, World Juniors, like.
Yeah, we usually be winding down by now, but we're not winding down at all.
Yeah, it's nonstop for you, Josh. It must be, just being, you know, a national hockey writer where you're just constant, you know, there's constant just information on the go.
Yeah, there's not really a whole lot of days off. Even if you're off, you're not really off. If something happens, you kind of got to jump on it. That's why, you know, but the great part of it is that you're in theory, you get your summers off, which we don't this year.
Not this year.
At least not right now. So our summer might be, you know, middle of October to middle of November, which will be a little colder at the cottage, but that's fine. If the chance to be, you know, part of this, which is going to be such a, you know, if it happens, you know, an incredible story. You know, the league getting back up, empty buildings, middle of summer. You know, just so many different things. There's going to be so many twists and turns. Yeah, so even just a regular hockey season, you know, it basically usually starts for me, you know, around the end of August. Guys start skating, and you sort of just hang out at rinks and see if you can get to guys, and just, you know, that's another thing. Just you can get wind of a bunch of NHL players skating. You know, for the most part, they'll be happy to chat with you afterwards. You know, some won't, but you know, that's fine. So yeah, the year sort of starts end of August, and then you know, goes right through to basically July 2nd. You know, lots of meetings, lots of things that happen, and it's lots of twists and turns in the road, like I said, but you know, I wouldn't trade it.
I want to end the conversation with just talking about, just, reporting and covering hockey, because, while there are, opportunities now for younger journalists and writers to, start blogs and, different unique opportunities, it's still saturated. Sometimes it can feel hard to sort of break through the ice, if you will, in your hockey coverage. In your experience, Josh, just covering the game, like, how do you stand out, as a reporter, as a writer, when there's so many other journalists just trying to get to the same information as you and, write really compelling stories, particularly in Toronto, the biggest market in hockey?
Well, I think what I would say is for the younger journalists. I mean, I know it can be challenging and daunting. It was daunting when I started, but my advice would be, the amount of journalists that I see, young journalists, will be in the locker room. They got a press pass for the day. Like, do something with that. Don't just stand in the scrum. Don't just, follow the crowd. If you're doing it for a school project or a blog, and the amount of reporters I've seen, and this is not a criticism, I know it's hard, but just ask some questions. Some questions. Come with good ideas. Be creative. Go through other newspapers in other cities, other websites, check what story, what's the trend, what's happening. I mean, it's easy for me to sit here and say that, but it really is pounding the pavement with your keyboard and sort of just coming up with ideas, because, you're very fortunate to even just get in that locker room. You're fortunate if you have a chance to chat with an NHL player or coach, and, morning skates can be completely boring, but you might throw out a question and it gets a great answer. I talked to one young reporter who was blown away by the lack of questions that I'm like, why didn't you ask any questions? That's what you're there for. Don't be scared. Don't be scared to ask. That's the way you get remembered. Whether you might get shot down, but that's part of the job. So I would say just keep grinding. It's tough. I'm not going to say it's not easy. It's tough, but there's enough good stories out there and enough people with eyeballs that are really willing to listen and willing to look, that it can be done. It's not easy, but there's lots of opportunity, and I really do think that you mentioned vlogs, and that's important. Just write. I mean, the only way you get better is by writing. You write a lot. I mean, I edited a lot. I'm just seeing other reporters, the way they write. There's a lot of things that go into it, but I just think it's got to break down that wall and put yourself out there is my number one piece of advice.
Yeah, I mean, that's great advice. And for me, I remember my first few events, and look, that very first question you ask in a press conference can be daunting, given you're here, and but if you just take that risk, but if you don't take that risk, you won't get better, right? And I think
there's also just what are you doing there if you're not going to ask a question?
Exactly.
What's the point of being there? So you don't have to ask 10 questions, but make it worth your while, make it worth their while. And the amount of times that I sit there and I see people that just don't, what's the point of even being there? I don't understand what you're doing. And that's not just young reporters. That's lots of reporters.
Of course.
So I think you just got to put yourself out there. You're there for a reason. Trust in your abilities, because obviously you're there for, you've shown an interest, you've been hired, or you've put in the time. So prove to yourself, prove to other people that you belong, because it's a great opportunity to talk to these people that we hold on a pedestal. They're just human. They're happy to talk to you for the most part, but you just got to you got to cross that bridge and take that risk.
Josh Clipperton is a national hockey writer for the Canadian Press. Josh, always great talking to you. Wishing you all the best for the rest of the year, and hopefully we have some hockey to talk about next time we chat. But I really appreciate you coming on the Weesports Quarantine Chronicles.
Let's hope that there's some hockey soon. Thanks, Lucas. Appreciate it.